because I have a little surprise story that I wanted to share. So yes, I'm originally actually from Brooklyn, or Flatbush, as we say. And even though I haven't been there since I lived there since I was very small, I have a story about life coming full circle. About 3 years ago, I went to see Lara Lou in a fringe play downtown in the East Village. And Lara Lou, Joe, and I used to belong to a theater collective called Polaris North. And Mary Lynn had written a play that I had done there. So I already knew Mary Lynn and Joe and Lara Lou. So after the show was over, we were all standing outside waiting for Lara Lou. And Mary Lynn's husband, Bob, came along, and she said, oh, I'd like to introduce you to my husband. This is Bob. I said, hey, Bob, how are you? I'm Susan. And we all go to this little bar, and it turns out that Bob and I sat next to each other while the three of them were chatting. And so Bob says to me, so where are you from? And I said, oh, I'm originally from Brooklyn. And he said, so am I. And then I said, oh, well, where? And he said, Flatbush. And I said, oh, so am I. And then I said, well, where in Flatbush? And he said, East 17th Street. And I was like, what? So am I. And then I said, where on East 17th Street? And he said, between Church and Caton. And I said, me too. And I was like, what? When? And I said, you're probably about the age of my brother, near or less. Did you go to Erasmus High School? My brother went to Erasmus High School. And then he said, well, who's your brother? And then I said, well, my professional name is Barrett, so I never used my real name. And I said, Mark Barshatsky. And he said, oh my God, I went to Hebrew school with your brother. And, we used to hang out. And then I was honestly, talk about life coming full circle, and I owe it to those guys, because I hadn't seen Bob in about 50 years. And I remember Bob, when I saw the picture of him on this book, this is the guy I remember, that little boy with a beautiful curly head of hair. And it just like flooded so many memories for me. And of course, as I'm reading the book, so many memories are coming back. So Bob used to hang out in my room with my brother. My parents, we had a big room, and my parents had put the furniture as to sort of separate the rooms, and I was on one side, my brother was on the other. And Bob remembered that I read Peanuts and Charlie Brown. I hadn't even remembered that. And it's just pretty amazing. When Bob found out that I had played against opposite Jennifer Lopez in the TV series Shades of Blue, he started calling me Susie from the Block. And he also said to me when we reunited a few years ago that he remembered the day I was born and that I was little Susie. So it's kind of interesting that he now calls me Susie from the Block. And so tonight, Susie from the Block is going to read about the block that we both grew up on and her brother. My brother and I have always had a strained relationship at best, and we've actually been estranged since about 2014. We haven't spoken since my mom passed away and we sold her house on Staten Island. So it's not a flattering portrait, but reading it, I think, may be healing. And this, folks, is how Bobby and Naziland begins. So I'm reading chapter 1, The Goyim and the Jews. First of all, I didn't call them Goyim. My parents and grandparents called them Goyim. I knew what the word meant. I knew hundreds of Yiddish words, maybe 1,000. I just never used them because they sounded too Jewish. Yiddish was the language old Jews spoke when they didn't want young Jews to understand what they were saying. So I didn't call the Goyim anything, even though our building was full of them. Mostly they were Catholics like the Coogans who lived on the ground floor. At first there were 5 Coogans, James Sr., Mary, Stephanie, James Jr., and Christopher. Then when I was 5, Gary was born, and soon after that, Mary, whom my mother called the Shiksa, was pregnant again. It began to seem as if she were popping out a new kid as often as their dog Queenie was popping out a litter, which was just about every year. Why does Mary have so many babies? I asked my mother, who only had me. Because they're Catholic, she said, which as far as she was concerned explained everything I needed to know about Catholics in general and the Coogans in particular. Like, why they hung over every bed in their apartment a bloody, agonized Jesus on a cross that horrified me every time I went to visit them and eat their Goyim food slathered in Goyim condiments, or why James Jr., Stephanie, and Christopher went to Holy Innocents rather than PS 249, where they learned that the Jews killed Christ, though they didn't seem to hold me personally responsible. Or why Mary washed out James Jr.'s and Christopher's mouth with soap every time they took the Lord's name in vain. This was a punishment my mother held over my own head like the sword of Damocles, should she ever hear a dirty word spout from my lips. But she never inflicted this cruelty upon me, not because she never heard me say fuck or shit, and not even after our next-door neighbors, Mrs. McAllister, told her that I was standing in front of the house shouting, fuck, at the top of my lungs. She never did it because that was physical child abuse, and enlightened Jews trafficked only in the emotional kind. And she never stopped me from hanging around with the Coogans, or any other Goyim for that matter, even though she preferred I spend my time in the company of Jews, except for Jeffrey Abramovitz, who lived in the building next door. My mother must have known that Abramovitz, though he possessed only a vague awareness of what a vagina was, had taken it upon himself to teach me everything he knew about sex, usually as we walked to and from Hebrew school, though occasionally he'd instruct me in the privacy of my bedroom, telling me that fucking is when you put your dick in a girl's ass, and that babies come out of the cunt, which he said was the size of a pinhole, before asking me, do you know what rape means? I'd heard the word but didn't know what it meant, so I took my best guess. It's when you strip a girl? No, he said. It's when you put your dick in a girl's ass when she doesn't want you to. It is not, I objected, having a hard time getting my mind around the idea that sometimes a girl did want you to put your dick in her ass. Or maybe my mother found out that Abramovitz, who knew that I coveted his ultra-rare Roger Maris baseball card, #1 in the top series that year, had agreed to give it to me if I'd licked the sidewalk in front of his house 61 times. One for each home run Maris hit in 61. Which I did, and then felt so angry and humiliated, I took my new Maris card home, stashed it in a safe place, pried open a dead dry cell battery, and unaware that the black gunk inside was battery acid, went back outside and smeared it on the head of Abramowitz's best friend, Michael Mendel, because Abramovitz was always giving him baseball cards for free, even if he didn't have a double. I thought Mendel might try to punch me, but instead he burst into tears and ran home. And Abramovitz ran home too to tell his mother what I'd done, which naturally led to my permanent banishment from the Abramovitz household, not to mention the beginnings of a reputation among certain neighborhood parents as a bad influence, a wild and malicious kid, and a troublemaker capable of wanton violence. Which was true, though I was hardly the worst that Flatbush had to offer. Not even close. And that's it. If you want more, you gotta buy the book. Buy the book.